Namaste. You're listening to the Savannah Podcast. Join us on an exploration of Eastern spirituality, yoga philosophy, and conscious living for the new age. This podcast is a production of SavannahSpirit.com, where you can find a large selection of Om and yoga clothing, spiritual jewelry, and unique fair trade gifts from the Far East. Now here's your host, Ashton Szabo.
Welcome to the Savannah Podcast, everyone. I am your host, Ashton Szabo. Today is part 3 of our Ganesha mini-series on purpose, success, wealth, and fame. In episode 9 of the Savannah Podcast, which was part 1 of our mini-series, we explored the story of Ganesha and the Shiva temple. We saw how money, success, and fame can all become distractions on the path of realization, on our path of fulfillment. In episode 11, part 2 of our Ganesha mini-series, we explored the story of the King of Gold and revealed another temptation of wealth and success: excess, greed, wanting more and more, how our tendency to impulsively and or mindlessly consume causes suffering and delusion. We're talking about late night internet shopping, splurge impulse buys at the store, always needing to have the latest gadget and iPhones and so forth. Or thinking that once you get that thing, you'll be happy. Once you get that car, that job, that house, that relationship, happiness will magically come and stay. And this brings us to our final story of the Ganesha mini-series. In part 3, we'll explore the role of wisdom in our journey of life and understanding. One final story that I think has lots of relevance to our modern culture as well. Because we're at an age of the decline of critical thinking. We're bombarded with information, but horribly lacking in understanding and wisdom. We're consuming junk food that is making us sick, and we're consuming junk thought that is making us dull. And one of my favorite stories of Ganesha demonstrates the importance of using our intellect, our creativity and imagination, allowing greater meaning to come into our lives, to further our knowledge and understanding, our wisdom, right? More importantly, let's use that word wisdom. Ganesha in this story demonstrates his wisdom, all right? And this is to say that we can realize that you can know something and you can understand something. Right? I can read a menu of food and know all the ingredients as well as all the items on the menu. But unless I've tasted any of the food or any of those ingredients, I don't really understand what the food tastes like. I don't truly understand it unless I've experienced it, unless I've embodied it somehow. Another example is that I can read every poem about love ever written and know love, but until I've felt love in my own heart, I can't really understand it. It's merely an intellectual exercise at that point. And even in some cases, I might still experience it, experience love or whatever, and still not understand it. Now, there is still a step beyond knowing and understanding, and we'll call that wisdom. Wisdom, as I define it here, is applying your understanding to your actions. Right? It's one thing to know something. It's another thing to understand it. But it's an entirely different thing to be able to understand and apply what you understand, and that's wisdom. Even if we're applying knowledge, that too is wisdom. All right, maybe I know love. I know the right thing, but I don't truly understand it. But if I can't apply that knowledge into action, but if I can apply that knowledge into action, then I'm still demonstrating wisdom. And this very much ties into our other stories from our mini-series. I think we all know the trappings of wealth and success. We can intellectually know about the consequences and so forth. But that knowing probably isn't enough to stop me from a late night impulse buy on Amazon or eBay. It somehow, doesn't stop me from thinking that once I'm making a certain amount of money, then I can finally be relaxed and happy. Once I get that job, then I can be happy. We all know to be nice to one another. We all know the consequences of hate. This isn't missing from our human historical perspective, yet people still treat each other like crap, because we're lacking in understanding and wisdom. So this brings us then to our next story. Now, once upon a time, The divine family, the mother and father, Shiva and Parvati, and their two sons, Ganesha and Murugan, or Skanda, we'll call him. He has lots of names. They're all up on Mount Kailash one day at their home, and Shiva and Parvati decide to hold a contest for their two children. In some versions of the story, the prize was to be a golden mango, a theme we saw also in episode 5 of the Savannah podcast, although perhaps in a different context. But in other versions of the story, it's two wives, Riddhi and Siddhi, prosperity and success, that are to be the prize. So in essence, the prize for the winner of the contest is prosperity and success. The contest that Shiva and Parvati come up with is simple. The first of the two boys that can travel around the whole universe 3 times and return to this starting spot will win. Now, this is a bit peculiar because Skanda is the god of war. Right? Think of like the blonde-haired, jock, muscled quarterback guy, fit, athletic, super type A. The guy's vehicle, the animal that he rides on, is the super swift peacock. And then you've got Ganesha over here. He's chubby, he loves his sweets, he's got a big round belly. He's not exactly the poster boy of physical prowess or speed. And he rides a mouse, right? A giant elephant riding a tiny little mouse. And they're not going too fast as that tandem, right? So it looks like that Skanda is not only going to win, but truly that the contest was set up so that only he could win. Peculiar, right? Coming up with a contest that is so obviously skewed in one person's favor, and Ganesha seems doomed to fail. So Shiva and Parvati announce the start of the race, and Skanda takes off. Pew! He just flies off and leaves Ganesha in his dust. And Ganesha is kind of sitting there like, what the heck? Like, thanks, Mom and Dad. Thanks for laying on this contest that I can't possibly win. But instead of getting caught up in negative thinking, he allows his mind to whirl along with possibility. Shiva and Parvati, they represent the whole universe. They are everything. They are the manifest and the unmanifest. And even more simply, they're Ganesha's parents. Right? To any child, their parents are the whole universe. They are the center of it all. Now, while Ganesha is sitting here thinking all this over, pew, whoosh, Skanda flies by. He's moving so fast, he's already gone around the universe once and come back. He notices that Ganesha hasn't even moved yet and figures he's got this race in the bag. He even slows down a little bit because why not? He's got no competition. He's out strolling around the universe at a nice, healthy speed. Think of the story of the tortoise and the hare, right? The hare, the rabbit, is so much faster that he starts to take rests, to hang out. He's not too concerned about losing. But Ganesha, he's still formulating this idea. But to any onlookers, it looks like he's just clearly losing the race. But the idea he's having, right? It's finally starting to sink in. He stands up. He walks around his parents, Shiva and Parvati, 3 times, and then he stops. He looks at his parents and he smiles. There's a brief moment of pause before Shiva and Parvati look to one another and nod. Then Shiva and Parvati declare Ganesha the winner. When Skanda returns, he's furious to find out that he's not the winner. He gets even more furious when he finds out how Ganesha won. But how Ganesha resolved the challenge was acceptable to Shiva and Parvati, obviously, so he remained the winner. Now, this is an important reminder of the power of intelligence, and more specifically of wisdom, to overcome brute force. Our success as a species is not because we have more brute strength and power than any other animal on the planet. It's our keen intellect that has allowed for us to ascend to the top of the food chain. Yet for some reason, we often default to the idea that to solve a problem, just throw more force at it. I remember when I was training heavily in martial arts, I loved training with larger, stronger opponents because I couldn't outmuscle them. I'd have to outthink them. And interestingly, most of those really big guys, those really strong guys, always relied on their strength because it was the easiest, and most of the time it worked. But as I learned essentially basic physics and how fulcrums and levers worked, I learned how to position my body and move around theirs. I learned how to negate a large part of their strength. And when that happened, it was like watching a building come crumbling to the ground. They were so used to using their strength, they didn't know what to do if it failed them. Right? But it was my intellect that overcame their brute force. My wisdom that overcame their brute force. I didn't just acquire more and more brute force until I eventually overcame them. Right? I used my intelligence, my understanding that came from years of training with larger opponents to find solutions to the problem, other solutions to the problem. Right? Understanding in action is wisdom. Right? Understanding in action is wisdom. Right? And this trait is what has allowed us to thrive as a species. Yet for some mind-boggling reason, we seem to forget this. Many of us default back to brute strength instead of understanding, right? Instead of applying wisdom. And I actually want to touch on one more insight from this story. Right? As a lover of myth, of story, of one thing perhaps meaning another thing, I notice how utterly literal our modern Western culture can be, and people sometimes have a hard time recognizing metaphor and using it to enrich their lives. And people everywhere have stopped looking deeper into things. And if it takes longer to understand than a 5-minute YouTube video, then a lot of people switch it off. It's like they look at the face, the surface appearance, and go no further. They are caught by what they literally see and don't bother investigating any further. This story is inviting us to see things for more than they are, to dive in, to explore possibility, to see that things can have more than one meaning, more than one solution, more than one offering. When you see obstacles in front of you, do you try to bash the obstacle down? Do you attempt to use brute force to make your way past it? Or can you allow the possibility of more innovative thinking to occur? Do you allow yourself space and time to use your intellect and to come up with alternative solutions to your problems? Right? Can you move through knowing, understanding, and wisdom, and sitting and thinking as Ganesha did to win the race? What do you ultimately gain when you allow this process to happen? And what can you actually, or when you can actually apply wisdom to your life? Well, you win the golden mango. You win the prize. The wives, Riddhi and Siddhi, prosperity and success. Right? Prosperity and success go not to the strongest, but to the wisest. Wisdom, that melding of knowledge, understanding, and action that Ganesha demonstrates. Right? He didn't get caught up in what was most obvious to all. He allowed himself to expand the possibilities of the solution. He demonstrated understanding in recognizing that his parents are the universe, and he displayed wisdom by putting that understanding into action and circling them to win the contest. So when you're out there living your purpose in the world, use your full capacities to interact with the world, see deeper into things, and use your intellect, and find creative methods and means to engage the world. Know things, understand things, and apply that knowledge and understanding into your actions. Or what would have happened if Ganesha simply knew his parents were the whole universe, just sat there the whole race knowing the answer but not acting? Or even understanding, like he's had an experience of the totality of the universe through his parents, right? But still not completing the contest if no action is involved. Right? It's not until he stands up and he applies his understanding through his actions and demonstrating his wisdom that he actually completes and wins the contest. So purpose comes from the heart, or what we could call perhaps the spiritual heart. Right? We find purpose by looking inward. And if we take our heart, our purpose, out into the world with wisdom, right, applying our knowledge and understanding, then Riddhi and Siddhi, prosperity and success, will naturally follow. But the key is you're not chasing after the wives. You're not chasing success. You're simply living your purpose elegantly in the world, joyously in the world. Right? And knowing your purpose is one thing, understanding your purpose is another. Living your purpose from that understanding is a completely other thing, and that's wisdom. When we can make our life a shining example of this, when we can live with purpose, when we can invite in deep, reflective thinking and feeling and understanding, when we can move through the universe with skill, when we're making that kind of offering to the world around us, the world takes notice. The world shifts. Even if it's not televised, even if it's not getting 1 million YouTube views, at that point we really make a difference. We make a difference when we live with purpose, when we encourage growth and intelligence, and innovation, understanding, wisdom. Our planet today is facing some of the most serious threats we've ever seen, or perhaps more appropriately put, human beings are facing the most serious threat to our ability to inhabit this planet that we've ever seen. Right? The planet will do just fine without us. We need thoughtful people living with purpose out there in the world, applying wisdom, right? Taking understanding into action. We need people who aren't just bouncing around with all of their might like a bull in a china shop. We need thoughtful, compassionate individuals, people who understand who they are and their purpose in the world. Like, we need you to live your purpose more now than ever. Skanda, Murugan, he has all the natural gifts, but here in the story, he's clearly not wise. He's not really understanding what the contest is. He thinks he knows what the contest is, but he doesn't actually understand it. And if he doesn't understand the true depth of the contest, well, then he can't apply that understanding as Ganesha does. And taking this in the whole context of everything. Now, it's not enough to know the temptations of success and wealth and fame. It's not really enough to know anything. We need to be able to apply knowledge and understanding into action. Right? We can sit down and have a conversation, all knowing, all acknowledging that success won't bring us happiness, wealth won't bring us happiness. Yet if we go right back into our lives and keep chasing the dragon, right, keep pursuing stuff, that job, that new pair of shoes, that relationship, whatever, then we're doomed. We are bound to live a life of suffering because we are unable to apply our knowledge or understanding into action. Where in your own life are you doing a skillful job of demonstrating wisdom? Where are you wise? What sorts of things in life do you feel you know, and what do you actually understand? And this in and of itself can be a great contemplative exercise. How much of what we think we understand is actually just knowledge, meaning it hasn't been experienced, it hasn't been digested yet. Well, personally, I read a lot, right? But reading is knowledge. It's intellectual. It's up here in the mind. But for it to move into the whole body, into the whole being, I need to understand it. And for that, I need an experience of the knowledge. And that's a totally different realm. Right? And once I get clear about the things I know and the things I understand, I can start to ask real questions. Right? Am I applying what I know and understand into my actions? Do my actions actually line up with what I know or understand? Or am I the bull in the china shop of my life, not really applying any of my understanding and just bouncing around from one impulse to the next, one desire to the next, one reaction to the next? Because it's wisdom that's going to allow me or you, any of us, to truly live your life with purpose. It's wisdom that will shield you from the temptations of success and wealth along the way. Now, I can know I was meant to be an artist or a musician or something else. Right? At that point, it's merely an intellectual exercise, and it's not enough. Maybe even I understand it. Right? If I live music in my body every day, play music every day, but I'm unwilling to go out in the world with that, if I take a job as a clerk instead, I'm going to be miserable, or unwise. Or to be able to take action on my understanding, to go out, to be bold, to be wise, and live my understanding, my purpose out in the world, now that's something. And part of the consequences of our culture hiding away its old people, its elders, is that we've lost a lot of wisdom. And cultures all throughout history have venerated their elders, listened to how they applied wisdom into their lives, or they didn't. Either way, there's so much to learn from our elders. I think that's part of why we've gotten in the place we have. We hide our elders away in old age homes, assisted living centers, and so forth. We hide death in our culture. Like when people are aging, it's something to be shunned, to be hidden away. And we have a culture that tells people to run after success, fame, and money. And even though there are plenty of people that have ascended that pillar of success only to turn back and say, stop, it's a trap. It doesn't actually make you any happier. We as a human species have a lot to learn from one another, and from other cultures, from our elders, from the various stories and myths of the world. And I hope these stories help you know, and that knowledge helps you understand, and that you can apply that into action. That we can all demonstrate wisdom in our lives. And if we do that collectively, well then prosperity and success, riddhi and siddhi, will come to us all. We can collectively lift one another up. We'll all be thriving. Well, I think that's enough for today. I hope you've enjoyed this 3-part mini-series following a few stories of Ganesha. If you haven't already, go ahead and listen to episodes 9 and 11 of the Savannah podcast for the first 2 installments of the mini-series. So subscribe to our channel, leave a review, and please, if you're enjoying the podcast, share them with your friends and family, share them on social media. Help us collectively uplift the knowledge and understanding of our community and of the world. I'm Ashton Szabo. This is the Savannah Podcast. Thank you for listening. And I'd also like to offer up a special thank you to Zach Cooper, our sound engineer, who brings all of these stories to life. Thank you for all the work that you put into these shows. And Savannah Spirit, thank you for supporting these shows and making them possible. I hope you all have an incredibly wise and purposeful moment. Thanks again for listening. Namaste.
You've been listening to the Savannah Podcast. To find out more about Savannah, go to savannahspirit.com or follow Savannah on Facebook at facebook.com/Savannah Spirit. For daily inspiration, check out our blog at savannaeast.com. Be sure to join us next week for a new episode, and thank you for listening to the Savannah Podcast.